Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Latina Success. Today, I have an amazing guest with me, which I think is bringing a lot of value to this conversation. We are going to be talking about apprenticeship as a pathway to tech careers. And it's Mike, who is the founder of Creating Coding Careers, a nonprofit organization, which is an innovative nonprofit which has been pushing for diversifying the tech community. And well, I don't want to be saying more. I would like Mike to introduce himself and talk a little bit about you, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. My background is I'm a software engineer. I've been writing software for many years, and I eventually wound up working at an amazing coding bootcamp. I learned a ton from that experience, and then decided to kind of break out and do that on my own. So it's been challenging at times, but it's super exciting always to see when people get that first job offer, when people come back to us after they've been on the job for a while. They talk about what their life is and how it changes. And so I'm just proud to have such an amazing team that I work with, and excited about the opportunity to help many more people break into tech.
Yeah. So thank you, Mike. Can you describe, like you were saying, kind of your background, how your journey led you to build creating coding careers, right? Like what was inspiring you to create uh, this nonprofit?
Yes, for me, a lot of the challenges that I faced when trying to help students was what sort of in me as an engineer, I'm always looking at how do we design a solution once we understand what the problem is. And for me, the problem was that a lot of students couldn't afford to go to a coding boot camp, and they couldn't afford, $20,000 in tuition. They couldn't afford to take, 6 months off and not be working. And so I wanted to be able to fix some of those problems and make it more accessible, make it more affordable for really anybody, right? And like remove all of the barriers that might prevent anybody that wanted to explore a career in tech to be able to have a pathway that would help them be successful. So um, when I first got sucked into this, so I was a principal software. I was working at a company downtown. It was a fast-paced, small startup. We had dogs in the office, and we had catered breakfast and lunch, and we had like all these like really cool things that we had as benefits because we were really valuable assets to the organization. And so I thought, man, when I look around, I didn't see anybody that looked like me. How could I help more people be able to live this kind of lifestyle? And so I started having meetups in the evening. The boss would let us use the office, and he'd let us, get food and beer and just kind of like hang out with the community and try and encourage people to think about this as a career pathway. And that's where I met Jeff, who was the founder of Origin Code Academy. And he basically told me, hey, I'm building a code school. Would you be interested in coming and teaching? And little did I know he was reeling me in. He had me come speak to his class a couple of times and then go to the demo day. And finally, I was hooked. And so I went and left a job as a cushy job as a principal software engineer to go and really be in the weeds trying to help people that were just brand new to technology. And so did that for a while, and then suddenly, without really a lot of notice, the school just closed down. And so then I was like, okay, what do I do now? Do I go back to a career as a software engineer, or do I push forward and start my own business? And so I decided to start a business which would eventually become creating coding careers. And it was tough because now I had to do basically everything. I wasn't just the person in charge of the classroom. I was in charge of like the whole business, hiring people, making sure that we were attracting students, finding customers, and it right away was like very overwhelming. And I just kind of pushed through. We started getting small wins here and there. And then eventually in 2019, we started thinking about how could we think about iterating on the model and making it even easier for folks to get into this career pathway. So we started talking about apprenticeships, and by 2020, we got approval to operate. And right at that same time, we got the order to shelter in place that COVID had hit, and now all of the businesses that we were planning to work with, they all said, we're pausing, we're not hiring people right now, we're not sure what's going to happen. And so there were a lot of ups and downs. There were a lot of times where I was just like, worried about how I was going to make payroll, worried about how I was going to help all these people that I had promised to get jobs for. And so, we started to learn, and slowly but surely, things started to rebound. The economy got a little bit warmer at the very beginning of COVID, at least for technology, and companies were really hiring. And so things got went much faster once we got beyond that first like year or so. And then it sort of like became just an up and down, like a roller coaster. We'd have a few wins, we'd have a few challenges, and eventually we just kind of learned the right questions to ask when we were dealing with the government. We learned the right ways that we could approach employers and start to really like scale this. And I think a lot of our success, the thing that we learned to kind of like double down on, was really focusing on what could that add value for the participants and thinking participant first, and then to grow the business always thinking about companies and like how can we add value for companies. And so we really looked at it being like we're a B2C, we have all of these people that we're impacting, but then we also have to add real value for companies in order for them to want to hire somebody that just has a lot of potential but isn't quite there yet with their skill set. And so it just requires this magic combination of being able to level up both sides of the business. And that's really what we learned over that, dramatic period of, the last 5 years or so of our history.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think talking about that, right? Like, what are the specific gaps that you see, right, between the industry and the apprenticeships, right? I'm very interested in learn that because I feel that a lot of companies doesn't understand what is the value, right, of bringing an apprenticeship, but also there is people who is afraid to start, a new path. So what are the gaps there, that you are closing with this, how you help with that?
Yeah, so again, let's start from the participant standpoint, because we always want to think about, this is life changing. So in order to do that, there does have to be a high level of trust that you're working with an organization. Creating Coding Careers has been doing this for a while. We're not like a fly by night organization. We're not pitching something that's like a get rich quick scheme. And sometimes it can feel like that. It can feel like this is too good to be true. But the reality is, like, people don't understand how much work it is until they actually get into the program and they have to start doing the work. And then they realize, okay, this is really hard. And that's why, everybody's not willing to put in the effort to make this happen. And that's why you can get these benefits and these rewards. If everyone were willing to do it, no one would be paying people that much to do this kind of work, right? So it's that scarcity of supply that means that there's some great opportunities in tech, especially with all of the amazing like AI tools and all of the like new technology that is making more and more businesses that didn't think of themselves as technology businesses want to move into and be a much bigger part of the digital ecosystem, right? So I think there's like nothing but a ton of opportunity. I know right now people will say, well, the job market is difficult and there's layoffs and AI might replace, but you got to remember that like we're the closest to being able to build the tools that will be necessary for businesses. And so I don't think anytime in the near future that people should feel like technology is not a great opportunity and a good space to move into, because there's just such a inordinate demand from people that may have never thought about leveraging technology in their business until now. And so it's not going to look like it traditionally looked, which again is like people are a little scared. They're hesitant to move into tech because they're thinking about and hearing about layoffs from these big tech companies. But the reality is that most of the businesses in America are not big tech companies. They're small businesses.
Yes.
And small businesses need to solve problems. And in many cases, they can leverage technology to solve those problems. So you're going to go from seeing a lot of attention around working at big tech companies, and you're going to see more of the attention, I think, focused on how do you leverage tools and platforms and technology to really solve problems for businesses that you may have never thought of as a tech organization. I remember a few years ago, I walked into a big convention hall. I was at Afrotech, a big technology conference, and there was John Deere, and I was really surprised by that because I was like, "What is John Deere doing at a tech conference?" But then, as I thought about it more, I was like, "Oh yeah, that's right. Like they have a lot of equipment that they need to like have GPS, and they need to understand how to like maximize, operating the machines out in the field and like the yield and all of those things are places where, yeah, you could apply a lot of technology to get more out of your part of your farm, right? And so that really helped me to kind of see that the future is going to shift away from like a pure tech play SaaS to a much more focused on like how do we adapt within these other businesses. On the business side of things, I think there's still a lack of awareness about apprenticeship. Like fundamentally, companies just don't understand what apprenticeship is. And so as they start thinking about how can they attract and retain the best talent, how can they find people that are going to invest in their organization? Because right now it feels like human beings are a little bit of like commodity, and it's not like we're not really focused on like how can you create a great opportunity for someone that wants to stay with your company for 25 years. Like it's unheard of these days, right? But that's how I think a lot of employers that get it and that understand apprenticeship, they think about it. They think about it as a strategic investment in like human capital and getting the right people in the seats to be able to help their business over the long term and not just like short term, like what do I need right now for the next 6 months? I need to hire 3 people. I think when companies think about it at that level, so a lot of the companies that have been doing this for a while are companies like Accenture, IBM, Microsoft, right? They think in terms of decades, not in terms of quarters and years, right? And so getting companies to think a little bit differently will help them to then get curious about apprenticeship. And once they are, then it's like, oh man, like it becomes really easy for them to understand and justify why this is a good investment.
Absolutely. And I think you just say it, right? I can tell you from my experience in customer success that I have worked with different kind of portfolios, right? Small businesses, sometimes they don't realize the power of technology. Like you said, you can think about a small business who even need to build their normal website, right? To get a contact lead, and then how to automate the lead generation or the email campaigns that they are doing instead of than just being there, right? Like before, it was like, okay, I just put my business, but now you need technology in order to survive or to scale. And it's not necessary that you have to be at these big tech companies. You can have an exciting project for a small company, make them to keep growing and to turn into something that, like you say, now we can see a small companies that has been supporting the economy for years. We don't realize, right, that they have been there for 20 years. But we look at them, some of them, they have been there longer than these big tech companies. So I feel that sometimes we don't value those companies as much, right? When thinking about going into tech means going into these big companies. And I think that will be my next topic, right? What are the misconceptions that are around the pathway of apprenticeship from the person who is trying to do it, and also from the perspective of the tech companies that you already kind of described, right? Like some of them doesn't really see the value, but what are the main misconceptions that you see on your end?
Yeah, I think for participants, one of the biggest misperceptions that I think people have is um, that it's very math intensive, and they think, oh, I'm not good at math, so I wouldn't be good at being a programmer. And the reality is that that's a really small portion of the type of work that most people do when they're in either software engineering or they're building, digital products. Now, it's not to say that there's no math, right? But like for most of the types of application building and things that you're kind of developing for a solution for a problem, the math is not that heavy, right? So I would say in most cases, if you had like a geometry or algebra level math, like you're gonna be fine. And that's gonna cover most software engineering completely. Now you might get into software engineering where you're building tools for the tool makers, right? So you're building things that are much more sophisticated. Then it's like, okay, well maybe then you might need calculus and you might need to be able to like really be good at much more complex problem solving, right? But I would say for almost all others, like really basic, just arithmetic level, like just understanding, like if something is truthy or falsy, right? Like just basic logic is going to be enough to get you by. And in many cases, there are developers, there's what we call front end and back end. There are developers that work on the front end that deal with like very little of like math and reasoning, and they're dealing much more with like making things look aesthetically pleasing and understanding the new language or the vocabulary that you have. And so an attribute that would be more helpful might be someone that's bilingual, right? Because by being bilingual, you already understand how to pick up and like learn another language. And that's really what we're talking about when we talk about software. We're just talking about speaking in a language that the machine understands so that we can get it to, produce something in a digital space versus producing something in a physical space. So from the biggest misconception that I would say is that one, is that like this is a very math intensive and like you got to be a super nerd in order to be successful. And that's not the case at all. I think at the other end, the other misperception from like a business standpoint is that apprenticeship is like internship. If they've never heard the word apprenticeship, or if they're not thinking about it the same way they might for like a plumber or an electrician or somebody in the construction trades, they might have like known about that when they grew up. But if a lot of people, if they live like a white collar career, they don't socialize with a lot of people that are blue collar that might have gone through an apprenticeship program. So it's just not top of mind. So when I say apprenticeship, they hear internship. And they'll
Mhm.
even say like, "Oh, that's kind of cool that you work in internships." And I was like, "No, no, 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 I didn't say that word. These are completely different concepts." And so I think that's the other misconception, is that apprenticeship is internship, and it's like not even close, not even close.
I think it would be great to explain that difference, because like you say, that could be the first misconception. I can totally agree, right? Like, oh, internship are for training or learning something, and I can see the difference. So it would be great if you can explain that to us.
Sure. I think the simplest analogy that I use is that of like, think of an internship as like dating, right? Like you go to a bar, you meet someone, you have a good time, you enjoy yourself. Apprenticeship is more like marriage, right? Like you're making a commitment that's much longer and much more serious and much more involved. And like both parties understand that. Both the company understands that and the apprentice understands it. If you think about just the raw components that an apprenticeship needs, is you have to have it's always a paid job, so it's always paid. So you don't have to say paid apprenticeship. That's like if it's an apprenticeship, it is a paid job. Now you might be earning a training wage. That wage might be slightly lower than the wage might be when you get like fully trained and you're ready for independent work. But it's always paid. It always has some level of mentorship. It always has some related instruction that's provided as part of the process. And then lots of hands-on, lots of experiential learning is typically the way you're going to pick up the new skills. It is one of the oldest professions, right? Like being an apprentice is something that we did in the, very beginning of figuring out how do we skill up people and how do we move into a more industrialized society. So I feel like when people think about internships could have some of those elements. An internship could be paid, but it could be unpaid. An internship could involve you having a mentorship, but you might not get any mentorship and you might just have to do some tasks. You might get an opportunity to learn a lot or you might not learn a lot. And so I feel like internship is much more of a short-term experience that's typically designed to sort of feel out, is this a good potential career path? Is this a good potential candidate for a company? But an apprenticeship, they've made a commitment. They've said, like, we are bringing you in at least for this period, at least for a year or 2 years. You're going to be with us. You're going to be paid. We're going to try and skill you up with the intention that they can find a place for you within their organization. Because no one wants to invest a year of time skilling someone up to just let them go. That's very different than like spending a summer working at a company while you're going to school, right? And so I think people don't have a great mental model of that here in the United States, mainly because it's just not as popular as it might be like in Switzerland or Germany or the UK, where a large number of students, when they're graduating from high school, will go down one of two pathways that are considered like totally viable and like totally equal. They can go down an apprenticeship pathway or they can go down a college pathway. And here in the United States, there's just been this stigma around going to work right away instead of going to college, right? College is always thought of as like the best pathway, right, for the most options. But the reality is it doesn't have to be that way, right? We could have college experiences that blend apprenticeship. One of the things that I'm working on right now is apprenticeship degrees, being able to like go on the job, and while you're working on the job, be earning college credit for the things that you're learning on the job. This isn't like, oh, college is like, being forced into the company. It's the other way around. It's like, how do we take the experience that you're learning and give you credit for what you're already learning, like in the field, in the industry? And I feel like as soon as we start thinking more that this isn't binary, you have to either go to college or you have to start working right away. And we think there are pathways that could be a blend of those. It's not an either or. I think then more people have a mental model, and we'll be able to have a lot more experiments around this, and we'll be able to see a lot more of this becoming common and popular. Because parents, when I talk to parents in the high schools, like they're very excited about career technical education. They're very excited about pathways that can get their kids feeling like they're having a meaningful career journey versus going to college, taking on a lot of debt, and then trying to figure out, is this going to pay off, right? And that's scary these days, right? College is very expensive, or at least can
And
be.
and I feel, I'm almost 40 years old, and I see that a lot of my friends sometimes go into this thought like, oh, I think I made a mistake of my career. I'm not, excited as I thought I would be. I didn't know where I want to go. And I feel that comes also with my next question, right? Like a lot of friends, I always see like, hey, I want to, you know, work in this industry. How can I move right from this path to this other? And in my experience, when I was going into college, that is exactly where you mentioned, right? You don't have role models, or you don't have that opportunities to give you the path into what you really want to go. I think in myself, I tried to knock a lot of doors and try to find out about that because of my personality. But if you don't have that personality, then immediately you just try to go in the normal career, right? Because that's what you know, and you prefer to take something that you already know instead of trying to find a way. But I imagine probably during your program you have been having people who has been changing paths. I experienced that, like going from one career to say, I think I want to move into coding. Have you encountered that?
Yeah, sure. And so I think from the very beginning, I think that's where a lot of coding boot camps kind of took off, because it was the first time that people could see like, hey, if I committed to a short term this new pathway or whatever, then I would be able to see a high degree of success, right? And so they became really popular because people could see. It didn't take long for someone to see somebody else do it and then think like, well, if they can do it, then I can do it, right? And so these days, though, the proliferation of coding boot camps, it kind of like it got really tough, and there aren't as many around these days. Like as a business, it was just a really hard business to run. And so I think now more than ever, it's important for people to realize that like it's something you can definitely try, something that you can even do on your own. There's so much information on the internet that you can, try coding. You can try figuring out if you enjoy it, if you enjoy the problem solving aspect of it, and then just go deeper and deeper until you can kind of figure out like, okay, what's the next thing that I would need to do to go from like the job that I'm in to this other job, like, and just kind of like work your way through. That's a lot of what we do in terms of offering a pre-apprenticeship program, right? We have an online, 100% free, on-demand opportunity for people to come in and work through a pre-apprenticeship program, and that really gives them the chance to like feel like, okay, this is something that I would enjoy doing, or make sure it's certain to them like, okay, this isn't the right change. Maybe I want to do something else, but like at least then they know. And that's, I think when I went to college, I was on like the 12-year plan, and so, I went for, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And then suddenly I was like, okay, I need to do this part time. I'm nowhere close to graduating. I don't even know what I want to do. And so then I went to community college and I started taking classes that just helped me explore what I was thinking about or what I was passionate about at the time. So I took some like radio and television classes, and I took some screenwriting classes, and things that helped me to kind of get closer to figuring out like, okay, this isn't quite what I want to do, but at least now I'm a little bit more certain that I enjoy coding more than I enjoy these other things. And so I can leave some of that behind and move in this direction. And so, yeah, I think for my kid, I have a 16-year-old, and he says he wants to be an engineer, but I think part of that is because his dad's an engineer, right? And so I think it'll take some time before we can really kind of understand if this is something he's going to want to do like long term, right? Or if this is something where he's going to maybe find something else and discover that there's something else that is really passionate about. But not everybody has a dad who's an engineer. And so that's
Yeah.
another part of the problem is that we don't have enough people that look like the people that aren't in tech, right? Because they don't know anybody that's in tech. They don't have an uncle or a dad or a sister or a mom that does this as a career that they can look at and say, I want to be just like them.
Yeah.
And that's tough, but it's something that we people that are in the industry just have to be sort of like big brother, big sister, and like try and find a way to pull people in and get them excited about technology.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons I create also Latina Success, right? Like trying to bring more people like us and, learn about our journeys. Now that you were describing, how people turn, you might have better success stories than me, but I wanted to say that I remember this friend. She was a teacher in Florida and she went to a boot camp to learn about front end. And then she learned that she loved it. So she quit her career as a teacher and started being a front-end developer. And I was able to work actually with her in one of the teams. But I always remember that story to say, hey, like you say, she was also coming from a diversity community. It was also minority, and she said, I never realized that it was easy, right? That I was able to do this because I always thought that was just for people who had money, just people who went through these kind of colleges and so on. I always was passionate about teaching, so it was making sense that I went to teaching. But then she wasn't enjoying it as much as she ended up enjoying being a front-end developer. So I feel that sometimes is that we don't have people that we can go and ask and relate. It happened to me when I was going through engineering. I didn't have any engineers around me. So the misconception about my parents for me was like, oh no, that career is for men. Yeah, that don't even think about it. And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure it's not just for men. It's something that there, right? But when parents also doesn't know about that career, how can they support them? So that's when it takes, programs like yours to make things easier because it's not about what I know, it's about what is out there. So I don't know if you have any, success story from your end that this person, started with this journey and now they are here. Would love to hear about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that's just really fun about the work that I do is that that happens every day. One of the big groups of participants that we have right now are transitioning service members. So we have a program with the Department of Defense where when people are coming through our program, be still finishing their career in the military, and for the last 6 months or so, they can come and train with us. And so these are folks that are they may be running around carrying a gun and one day and then the next day they're in front of a computer and they're coding and they're doing something completely different than like what their last 6 or 10 years might have been in the military. Sometimes it's closer aligned, right? So sometimes they might have been doing something that was like cybersecurity in the Air Force, and then they come into tech and it's just like, how do we get them a smooth transition into a civilian role? But oftentimes it's going to be, like I said, they are doing something with like a gun, and now they're doing something that's just like using their brain and trying to solve problems for companies. So the the one story that I think stands out to me beyond all others was I had a student many years ago, and she came in for her interview for the program, and she was carrying an infant in a child carrier, and she had her husband in tow too. So she's like marching in with her whole family. She sits down to do her interview to get into the program. And I was kind of spending the whole time trying to convince her that like this might be too much, right? You've got like, you got a little infant and like I don't know if this is gonna work out. And she said no, she had come from Brazil and she had been a student athlete, she'd been a tennis player, and so she's like, I've taken on all these challenges before. I know I can do this. And so, we let her in the program, and then she was just like hustling and she was busier than everybody else. And she was just like really on it, and she's the most driven student for a really long time. And then she landed a job at one of our partner companies. That company is New Rocket. So she was there, and that's a ServiceNow partner. So they do a lot of work around the ServiceNow ecosystem. And she was there for a couple of years, and then she ended up getting a job, and not at the partner. She moved to ServiceNow themselves, and so she got a job at ServiceNow, like on one of their like product teams. And so I'm just like, man, over the course of just that, 4 or 5 years, she went from like immigrant with a infant to like working inside of like a Fortune 500 company as like a critical member of like a program team, right? So I think that kind of journey though is something that I just see so often, and it's just like really amazing to be able to be part of like life-changing journeys like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, as a woman, and also I'm divorced, I always have seen this challenge where moms went, fully stay at home moms, and then suddenly they are in the middle of a divorce where they get without a secure job, and where can they start from zero, right? And like you say, going back into college is too expensive. It's really like, crazy to think that you're going to start your career again from zero, especially if you are in the middle of battle money and so on. So programs like you, I feel like those are amazing opportunities to give back somebody a career that is going to make them successful. So I love that story of that woman, even though she had a husband and all that. But make sure that you have a career that makes sense. I feel especially now since COVID is so easy also to get remote jobs. Working for me, in customer success, I have been working remotely for I don't know how many years by now, probably more than 15. So I know that there are a lot of opportunities that you can still be doing an amazing job and doing it from your house and having these challenges. But
Yeah, for sure. And it's one of those things where, again, my role during the interview is to really make sure people are like 100% sure that this is the right pathway, because it can sound very appealing, but then as soon as you let them in and they have to show up on Monday and they have to actually start doing the work, that's when you see a big shift for some people, right? Now, what can also be dangerous is when you think about the fact that like apprenticeships are paid roles. So sometimes folks will, maybe because this is a job and because they're just so desperate to have income coming in, they're not as transparent about the fact that like they're really struggling, and they just kind of like they don't articulate it the same way as a student might, where students might, yeah, I need to drop this class, this is too much, right? And so I feel like my job is to all make sure that we're kind of peeling back all the layers and making sure the person is like supported and they're able to sort of like feel like someone has their back, and not like they're just kind of like going through this on their own in frustration. And so it's not easy. I want to make sure that I make it clear that like these transformations can and do happen all the time, but it's mostly a testament to how hard people work to change their lives, right? We're just giving them the tools. We're just equipping them with like, here's a set of resources and a map that we've seen has worked for all these people before, but they still have to do the actual legwork of like every day doing that heavy lifting, right? And so it's just it's good to know that we have that pathway and we have the tools that are available. And then if we can find the right people that are willing to embrace it, and if it becomes their passion, then they can be very successful.
yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. It's not just about, sometimes I get questions from friends, hey, should I do this certificate? Should I go into this program? And always my answer is like, do you want to do that? Do you think it's going to be, because I feel like you can have all the certifications you want, but at the same time, also, like you say, as a company, I'm not going to be value your certificates. I'm going to value your experience. I'm going to value your passion of the way you do it. So sometimes I feel also there is that misconception. Oh, if I do A, B, C, I'm gonna get this, and it's not just like that, right? It needs to be some more behind, more about just to I have to do step one, step two. But well, Mike, I think we are getting at the end of this
Yeah.
conversation. I think we can continue. But I think before saying goodbye, I know you have a book, and I don't know if you want to say, something else to our audience, but first of all, thank you so much for having this interview with me and for talking about what you're doing, creating coding careers. I think it's amazing. And I, would love to keep in touch and see, how the audience can get in touch with you as well if they are interested in to take this path.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if anybody is even has an inkling of excitement about this and thinks that this might be something they're interested in doing, then I would say join, the pre-apprenticeship program, join our community. We have a free community where people can come in, they can learn how to code 100% free. And then if they decide that, okay, this is something they're serious about as a career pathway, then they may be able to get into the apprenticeship program, or they can get the book and they can do the things, the steps that are necessary. The book is really, Hacking the Bootcamp is all about taking the knowledge that I've seen other people be successful in like their efforts and just distilling it into like, if you do all of these things, you're much more likely to get a job than if you do the things we've seen people sort of fail at, right? And so we've seen just about every scenario, we've seen every type of person and personality. And so I think if people are serious and want to do this, there are definitely pathways in. It is just going to require, they got to get out there and make the effort and then find the right sort of like opportunities. And they are there. They are 100% there.
Yeah, awesome, Mike. Thank you so much. Where they can find your book? It's in Amazon. Do you have it?
Yep.
Yep.
It's on Amazon, and so it's on Kindle. We'll be releasing an audiobook hopefully soon. And then really the other best thing to do is just to kind of get started. Check out Creating Coding Careers website. That's cccareers.org. And from there, there's tons of like links and resources and ways that you can start right away figuring out, is this a career path that makes sense for you?
Okay, perfect, Mike. So again, thank you so much for this call. I really appreciate this episode, and well, I hope to keep in touch.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks.